Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Imposter Bride. Chapter 1. Stunned, Bonnie sat on the wooden steps of the porch, gazing out at the milk cows grazing in the sun-swept fields. Their tails lashed methodically at the persistent flies while sparrows darted amongst them, chirping. A hawk screeched from somewhere above Bonnie, but the sound barely registered in her ears. The pile of letters sat, all but forgotten, in her hand. Letters from a man in Plum River, Wyoming, to her younger sister Lucretia. A rancher man by the name of Jed Tolliver. He was seeking a mail-order bride. Lucretia, barely 16 years old, had answered him. Lucretia hadn't said a word to anyone about her plans. Not to Bonnie, not to David, their brother, and certainly not to their parents. By the dates on the letters, Lucretia and Jed had been corresponding for at least 3 months. Bonnie glanced down at the pile. A twinge of guilt nudged her in the ribs for reading her sister's private mail. Lucretia must have forgotten to hide the letters, for she had left them on the table in the bedroom they shared. Bonnie didn't mean to pry, but the pile of correspondence had immediately caught her eye when she was cleaning. The postmark from Wyoming Territory leaped out at her. "I don't want her to go," Bonnie muttered to herself. "She can't go." 16 years old was too young to travel to the Wild West alone. Why, that was halfway across the country where bandits, robbers, and wild Indians were on the prowl. That did not even include the wolves, mountain lions, and those dreadful snakes on the huge prairie. Bonnie had learned of such things in school when she had seen maps of the Great West. Lucretia might be old enough to marry, but she was innocent. And frail. The door shut behind her, and Bonnie jumped. Her first instinct was to hide the letters. Instead, she calmly met Lucretia's wide blue eyes as her sister sat down beside her. "Those are." "I know." Bonnie handed the stack to Lucretia. "I'm sorry I invaded your privacy, Luce. But I'm not sorry that I know what you're doing. You should have told me." Lucretia, a small girl with thick blonde hair trailing down her back and a thin, narrow face, had survived scarlet fever as a child. Thus, she had never been robust and often fell ill. Bonnie knew she would never survive the stagecoach ride all the way to Wyoming. "I want to help Ma and Pa keep the farm," Lucretia murmured, holding the letters close to her small bosom. "Mr. Tolliver has money. He would help us if I marry him." Always protective of her delicate sister, Bonnie put her arm around Lucretia's shoulders and pulled her close. "You know you won't live to arrive there, Luce." "I will so. I'm not as weak as you think I am." Despite Lucretia's protest, she didn't lift her head from Bonnie's shoulder. "What about Nick? Wouldn't you rather marry him? I know you two are sweet on each other." Lucretia broke into tears. "I wanted to marry him, Bonnie. I did. But Pa is going to lose the farm if he doesn't get money for the bank. This is the only way." "Hush now." Bonnie stroked her sister's soft hair. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." Lucretia lifted her wet face, wiping the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hands. "I'm going, Bonnie. Mr. Tolliver is expecting me." "What will you tell Pa and Ma?" Lucretia stared out over the fields just as Bonnie had. "I don't know," she whispered. "I'll think of something." "Please don't do this, Luce," Bonnie said, near tears herself. "I don't want to lose you." Her sister smiled through a fresh bout of weeping. "You won't, Bonnie. Mr. Tolliver is a kind man. You'll see. I'll make the trip and marry him, and I'll write you letters every week." Unable to halt her own sobs, Bonnie hugged Lucretia tightly. "I won't let you go. I swear it. You don't have any choice. It's my choice to make. I've given my word, Bonnie." We'll see about that, Bonnie thought. Bonnie slept little that night. She lay under her blanket, listening to her sister's light snores from the other bed and the creak of the shutters as the night wind pushed against them. Still early spring, the nights were yet cool enough to warrant a blanket before the summer's high heat and humidity struck in force. What would their parents say if Lucretia announced her plans? Bonnie knew, just as Lucretia certainly did, that their parents would forbid it. Lucretia didn't have the strength or stamina to survive the arduous trip of almost 2,000 miles. Bonnie had no doubt that was why Lucretia had kept her plans secret. Tossing in her bed, Bonnie tried to get comfortable, yet her worry wouldn't permit her to relax. How can I stop her? Clearly, Lucretia couldn't be talked out of her plans. However she tried, Lucretia refused to listen and had stormed away in a huff. Bonnie could snitch, of course, and tell Ma and Pa what Lucretia intended. That might not be enough to stop her, however. Lucretia was an adult and could simply leave. No doubt that was what she planned to do all along. Just leave. Closing her eyes, Bonnie tried to relax. She wondered what summers and winters were like in Wyoming. She knew of no one who had ever been there. The cattle on a sprawling ranch were probably far different than the placid milk cows on their small farm. Was this Jed Tolliver a cowboy? A man with a tall hat, chaps, and spurs, riding a big horse? Did he rope the cows to brand them, or punch them? Bonnie had heard of punching cows but couldn't understand what that meant. Surely men didn't punch a cow in the face with their fists. Or perhaps they did. Falling asleep at last, Bonnie dreamed of cattle with wide horns and a cowboy on a horse. When she woke at the sun's first light and the crowing of the rooster, she knew how she could stop Lucretia from traveling across the country to marry this rancher, Jed Tolliver. The answer was so simple and yet so frightening. Bonnie would go to Wyoming in her sister's place. She would marry Jed Tolliver herself. Like Lucretia, Bonnie told no one of her plans. She completed her chores, talked normally to her parents and Lucretia, and behaved as though nothing at all was going on. In secret, she studied stagecoach schedules while in town, stashed away extra food for the journey, packed clothing and mementos, and counted the money she had saved over the years. She had enough to cover the cost of the stage with a little left over. Whenever no one was looking, she studied maps of the West and traced the route her coach would take to reach Plum River, Wyoming. It would take more than 2 weeks to reach her destination. 2 weeks of rough roads, bad weather, and the risk of bandits and savages. The notion of those weeks scared her badly. Yet, despite it all, the idea of marrying a wealthy cattle rancher exhilarated her. Mostly, Bonnie felt she had made the right choice. Lucretia would stay to marry her sweetheart Nick, bear his children, and remain close to their parents. For if her sister went west... Bonnie shuddered at the thought. Lucretia would die on the trail, she was sure of it. What are you doing? Lucretia stepped into their bedroom just as Bonnie finished counting her savings a second time. Though startled, Bonnie recovered instantly and finished placing the bills and coins into her leather bag. Wondering about buying cloth for a new dress, she replied. Lucretia flopped onto the bed and sighed. I should start making one, too, she said, her tone dreamy. Jed will want to see me in a nice gown. Bonnie lifted a brow. Jed, is it? Not Mr. Tolliver. Lucretia squirmed on the bed long enough to pull a folded envelope from her pocket. I have another letter from him. He told me to call him Jed. As Lucretia extended the letter to her, Bonnie accepted it and read it. In the letter, the rancher offered his affections and eternal respect, stated how badly he wanted to meet Lucretia, and asked that she stop addressing him as Mr. Tolliver. I am your future husband, Jed, he wrote. As you are my lovely bride, Lucretia. How does he know you're lovely? Bonnie asked. Did you describe yourself? Only that I have blonde hair and blue eyes. Bonnie nodded, relieved. They shared those traits at least. Bonnie also had long blonde hair and blue eyes. Yet while Lucretia was 16 and small for her age, Bonnie was 2 years older, stronger and more robust. She was also taller and owned a woman's full figure. When are you planning to go? In a month. I need time to get my things together. And in 2 weeks I can sell the jewelry I made at the fair in town. I'll need that money to pay the stagecoach, in case Jed's funds don't come through. Without seeming to, Bonnie breathed a soft sigh of relief. She planned to leave long before then. While she hadn't yet made her excuse to be away from home, she knew it wouldn't be very difficult. Aunt Judith in Birmingham had written a while ago, asking for the girls to visit. She planned to inform her parents she needed time at Aunt Judith's before she accepted the marriage proposals of either John Burks or Liam O'Bannon. Both men had proposed marriage, yet Bonnie liked neither of them. Mr. Burks smelled of tobacco and rum and was often seen entering the local brothel any day of the week. He had no steady work and lived in a shanty at the edge of town. Mr. O'Bannon was just a bit too Irish for her taste, drinking whiskey and singing ballads until dawn. Yet, he owned the town's store. He was kind, charitable, always had a smile for her, and wasn't too bad-looking for an Irishman. He was, however, Catholic. Though her parents might smile to his face, she knew they'd rather see her marry Burks than O'Bannon, despite the lack of prosperity of the former. Bonnie herself wanted neither as a husband, for neither man held any attraction for her in the least. In reading Jed Tolliver's letters, he seemed the perfect match: hard-working, dedicated to family, a non-drinker, an early riser, and a man who loved children. "I'm going to visit Aunt Judith," Bonnie murmured. "I need to make my decision." Lucretia sat up. "Which will you marry?" "O'Bannon." "I refuse to marry a whoremonger." "Good, Bonnie. John Burks cannot support you, not the way he lives. O'Bannon is a nice man. But he's Catholic." Lucretia laughed. "So? He genuflects. At least he's a God-fearing, upstanding citizen. He will care for you, Bonnie." "I know he will." Bonnie despised herself for her deception, and she looked away from Lucretia's happy face. Only the fact that this web of lies meant her sister would survive into old age kept Bonnie from dissolving into tears and a bitter confession. By the time her sister realized what she actually intended, it would be far too late. Bonnie would be hundreds of miles away with a telegram sent to both Jed Tolliver and Lucretia. "Jed, I'm on my way, and Lucretia, I'm marrying the man you planned to marry. Instead, marry Nick and be well." "I hope so," was all Bonnie said. Chapter 2. Bonnie kissed her parents goodbye, waving to them as she picked up her heavy bags to walk the few miles into town. They thought they'd see her in a few weeks, ready to settle down as the wife of a good man. It was harder to leave Lucretia. Tears sprang to her eyes as she hugged her younger sister and kissed her cheek. Lucretia failed to notice them, no doubt happily visualizing her sister on the coach to Birmingham, only 100 miles away. No doubt, Lucretia planned to see her again before her own journey west. Bonnie pressed her palm to Lucretia's cheek. "Be well, my sister," she said, tears in her eyes. Lucretia laughed. "You act like I'll never see you again." Without answering, Bonnie turned away. "You won't, dear sister." Though Bonnie started her journey in the early morning before the heat came to stay, her bags, filled with not just her clothes and possessions, but with extra food, weighed her down. A strong girl, Bonnie nonetheless struggled for every step along the dirt road that led to town. According to the stage schedule, she needed to be at the station by noon. It was now 7 in the morning and she had walked barely a mile. The distance to town was about 3 miles, thus she expected to well ahead of time, despite her slow pace. The sound of trotting hooves and the squeaking of wheels behind her edged her to the side of the road. Trudging along, she glanced up as the driver reined in the team to a stop beside her. An elderly man in a straw hat peered down at her. "Miss Abel, ain't it?" Bonnie smiled up at Mr. Thompson. He farmed 100 acres a few miles north of her parents' place and was a kind, Christian man. A widower, he and his sons planted crops of tobacco every year and turned a reasonable profit. "Hello, Mr. Thompson." "Girl, what are you about? You'll kill yourself in this heat lugging those bags down this here road." "I'm headed to Birmingham," she answered. "You put those bags in the back of the wagon," he ordered, then get up on here. I'll take you to town. Not right for a girl as tiny as you to be walking out alone, as it were. Thank you. Tossing her bags into the back, she hoisted her skirts and climbed up onto the seat. Mr. Thompson clucked to his team, and they set out at a quick trot. I know it ain't none of my business, Mr. Thompson said, but why are you going to Birmingham? Bonnie launched herself into the familiar story of needing to make a decision about whom to marry and wanting to spend time with Aunt Judith. Mr. Thompson grunted, eyeing her sideways, as though seeing straight through her explanation for the farce that it was. Girl, if my boys wasn't married, I'd set them on you like a hound on a coon. You are a good girl and will make any a man a fine wife. Don't you be settling for that no-account Burke's fellow, nor the Irishman. You are too good for either of them. Bonnie turned her head away, wishing she could confess her real plan to Mr. Thompson. But there aren't any other men wanting to marry me, she said. He spat over the side of the wagon. Unless your pa intends to marry you off right away, you just wait. The right man will come along, God willing. He has come along, she thought. And he's in Wyoming. Jed glanced at the telegram his hired hand, Seth, had delivered to him. Seth had gone into Plum River for supplies and put in a stop at the telegraph office as instructed. Ever since Jed had started corresponding with Lucretia Abel a few months ago, he left standing orders that anyone going into town was to stop for telegrams and letters. He flicked the paper open. I am on my way. The simple phrase set his heart to beating faster. His intended bride, Lucretia Abel, had started her journey west. The telegram was dated yesterday, and he knew it would take her almost 2 weeks to travel from Alabama to Wyoming. Folding the paper, he placed it tenderly in the inside pocket of his coat. Through their correspondence, he had almost come to love, without setting eyes on her, the young girl from rural Alabama who had promised to marry him. Walking to his tall horse, Jed pondered his desire for a young bride and his placement of the advert in Eastern papers, mail order bride wanted. His lovely and beloved Becky had died giving birth to their third child almost 6 years ago. While his life on the ranch kept him busy, raising 3 children amid all his other responsibilities had become well-nigh impossible. He grimaced as he swung into his saddle. It wasn't just the children needing a mother, he admitted to himself. He felt lonely, adrift without a life partner. He craved the loving touch of a woman, the sweet scent of her hair, her special smile saved only for him. While he had loved Becky with every beat of his heart, she was gone now. It was past time for him to find a new love. She'd not condemn me, he thought. Not Becky. Becky would want him to find another and be happy in his life. Plum River held few opportunities for a widower. Too few women, and all save the ladies of the night, were already married. The ladies of the night themselves were unmarriageable for obvious reasons. Thus, he had advertised for a bride to come west. And now she was on her way. He clucked to his horse and cantered across the broad yard toward the cattle pens. Jed Tolliver owned over 10,000 acres of prime grazing territory and nearly as many head of cattle grazing on it. The United States Army bought both his beef and his horses as remounts and paid him top dollar for both. While just over 30 years old, Jed called himself one of the richest men in Wyoming. He reined in at the pen designated for branding, watching closely as his crew of 6 cowboys caught, threw, and branded his calves with his mark. Barty, dust blew up under the hooves of both horses and cattle, cows bellowed for their offspring, and cowboys whistled and waved ropes. They herded cows and calves into the pens where the calves were separated, branded and returned to their mothers. The animals were then released to the Great Plains to graze, grow, and procreate. The head cowboy loped his gelding toward Jed, tipping his hat in respect as he reined in. Almost done, sir. These here are the last for branding. What of the cattle ready for herding to Cheyenne? Richard, Jed's selection for cattle boss, gestured toward the south. Over 500 1- and 2-year-olds gathered down yonder for the drive, sir. I have 10 cowhands ready to go on your word. Jed nodded, satisfied. Start them tomorrow, Richard. Richard tipped his hat again and spurred his bay toward the vast fields that held the young cows waiting their turn to be herded to the slaughter pens in Cheyenne. Jed nudged his horse toward the far side of his vast yard that held the young, half-wild horses currently being broken to ride. Cowboys hooped and whistled as broncs bucked and kicked, trying their best to remove the nuisance riders off their backs. Unfortunately for them, those riders stuck tight and rode the broncs to a gallop, a trot, a walk, and finally to a standstill before they dismounted and unsaddled them. The young horses never forgot how they failed to offload the predators on their backs but remembered how obedience rewarded them, unsaddling and feeding if they did what they were told. Jed's oldest son, Hunter, sat on the top rail of the pen's fence, watching the cowboys work the young horses. By his dusty clothes and the bruise on his cheek, one of the colts had managed to dump him in the dirt. Jed grinned. "Did you get back on?" Hunter glanced over his shoulder. "Twice. I rode him out in the end." "Good. Are your chores done?" "Yes, sir. And it's Helen's turn to watch Charlie." Jed cocked his leg over the saddle horn, absently toying with his reins. "She's on her way." Hunter looked away, his mouth tightening. "We don't need her, Pa." "We do need her, son. I know you don't like the idea, but you need a mother and I need a wife. She's replacing Ma." Jed sighed, trying to be patient. Hunter never ceased to insist Lucretia Abel was arriving to take the place of his own mother. "That's not true, Hunter. You know I loved your mom more than anything. You don't have to love Lucretia. But you will respect her. And my decision." "Yes, sir." The boy's sullen tone informed Jed that Hunter had his mind already made up, and Lucretia might be in for a hard time. "I hope she's tough," he thought as he returned his foot to his stirrup and reined his horse away. He couldn't force the children to accept Lucretia as their stepmother, and none of them liked the idea of his pending marriage. Both Hunter and Helen understood his reasons. Charlie was too young to truly understand what the new woman in his life meant. They may understand, he thought, but they will resent Lucretia anyway. He couldn't think of anything that might deter his children from seeing her as anything but an interloper. Chapter 3. The weeks passed quickly. The stage was due to arrive the next day, but Jed wanted to get into town early in case it rode in ahead of schedule. He had received a telegram from Lucretia 2 days before when the stage stopped in a small town about 150 miles away. Excitement built in him as he dressed in his best Sunday clothes, and not even Hunter's scowl could alter that. "Seth will be dropping in on you," Jed told him as he put on his tie. "You're in charge. You get your chores done, and make sure your sister and brother do theirs." "Yes, Pa. With luck we'll be back the day after tomorrow." He paused to give Hunter a stern glance. "And when I present her to you, you will be polite. Understand?" "Yes." Jed stared at him. "Yes, sir." "Good. Now go saddle the horses. Mine and the Palomino mare." Even the long ride into Plum River didn't sweep the excitement from Jed's belly. It was nearly dark by the time he arrived in the town, but piano music wafted from the saloon on the evening breeze, and men on horseback and driving teams with buckboards still roamed the single main street. A few women in full gowns and sunbonnets walked down the wooden sidewalk as they made their way home. He turned the horses over to the livery stable, and went into the tall, 4-story hotel. "Why, Mr. Tolliver. Look at you, ready for church. Or a wedding." Jed smiled as he kissed the cheek of the plump woman who greeted him. Lacey Hendricks, the wife of the hotel owner, smiled when he took her hands into his own. "She'll be here tomorrow, Mrs. Hendricks." "Oh, my goodness, I cannot wait to meet her." "You must be so thrilled. Is it all right to be scared spitless?" She laughed, her dark eyes shining. "Of course it is, my good man. She is one lucky girl, I must say." Mrs. Hendricks hustled him to the table where other guests had already seated themselves for supper. "Eat, now, Mr. Tolliver. We will talk after. No sense letting the food get cold." Supper was excellent, roast swimming in gravy, potatoes and beans hot in butter. He ate his fill, talking casually to some of the other guests. He'd made no secret of his intent to bring a mail-order bride west, and the general reaction from the folks he told was positive. Some of the men in the town, or his neighboring ranchers, spoke of writing adverts for their own brides-to-be. Later, Mrs. Hendricks showed him to his room, talking excitedly about meeting his bride on the morrow. "I will reserve the best room for you, for your wedding night," she said. "Have you spoken with the Reverend yet?" "I will tomorrow. Don't forget the ring, dear." Delving into his pocket, he produced a small gold ring with a tiny glittering stone. "It was my mother's." He thought Mrs. Hendricks would burst into tears on the spot. "Oh, you dear, dear man. Will you and Mr. Hendricks stand with us?" Now, she did cry. Weeping with joy, she covered her mouth with one hand while she fumbled for her handkerchief with the other. "We will be honored, Mr. Tolliver." Sleep came hard for him. Though the bed was comfortable, he tossed and turned, his excitement turning to worry. What if Lucretia didn't like him? What if he didn't like her? While her letters were one thing, reality might be something entirely different. Could she turn out to be horribly ugly? Blonde hair and blue eyes might easily be attached to a face like a witch. She sounded nice, but Hunter's prediction that she would be mean to him and his siblings might be all too real. Am I making a mistake? He woke from dream-haunted sleep, hardly rested, and dressed once more in his best suit and tie. After a quick breakfast, he sought out the reverend of the church and made arrangements for the wedding. Nervousness replaced excitement, but he knew he had come too far to back out now. Lucretia had crossed half the country to marry him. As the day waned into afternoon, he paced up and down the sidewalk at the stage office, earning himself odd looks from the station master, and those also waiting for the stage. His heart leaped into his mouth when shouts and cries from the town heralded the arrival of the stagecoach. Galloping hooves and the jingle of harness brought him to the street, watching with a knot in his throat as the coach and its team of 6 bore down on him. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered as the coach's driver hauled on the reins, stopping the team in front of the office. He wiped his suddenly sweaty palms on his trousers, his eyes on the coach door. It opened. A stout matronly woman emerged, then 2 young children. Jed saw a few men on board through the windows, but no young Lucretia. Surely that matron was not her. The woman seemed to be searching for someone in the crowd as she held the hands of the youngsters. His breath caught. A woman emerged from the carriage, young, slender, her blonde hair falling past her shoulders. Wide blue eyes set in a face with high cheekbones and skin like fine porcelain. Lucretia was beautiful. Travel-weary, her clothing was a bit stained, and her shoulders rounded with fatigue. She, too, searched the crowd around them, seeking him. His heart thumped hard in his chest as he pushed his way through to her. "Miss Abel?" She glanced up. "Mr. Tolliver?" Jed had to chuckle as he took her hand. "We shouldn't be so formal, Lucretia." The girl smiled, her cheeks turning a bright pink. "Of course." Jed. Taking her arm, he led her to the seats built into the wall of the station. "Sit and rest for a few minutes. I will get your bags." He found himself shaking, trembling like a newborn colt. "Get a hold of yourself, fool." But he couldn't halt the silly grin from spreading across his mouth. He found her luggage easily enough, as the other passengers had already collected theirs. The crowd hadn't thinned by much, as the coach driver was still answering questions and delivering news from afar. Jed hadn't managed to halt his grin as he returned to her. Through her exhaustion, she smiled at him, and he wondered if he was being fair to her to marry her that day. "Do you need to rest, before, he stammered, awkward. She rose from her seat. "I'm fine, Mr. Jed. I would like to change clothes, however." She stroked her stained gown with her hands. "I do have a nicer dress to wear." "Of course. The hotel is this way." As he expected, Mrs. Hendricks fussed over his new bride, brought her water to wash with, brushed out her long tresses and gave the girl pretty ribbons to plait into her hair. When the women emerged from the room, Jed's breath caught. The girl was so beautiful and wore a rose-colored gown trimmed in gold, petticoats peeking from the bottom. While not exactly a wedding gown, it seemed to suit the situation, and her, perfectly. Beside him, John Hendricks nudged him in the ribs. And it was John who led the way to the tiny church. Jed and his bride signed the registrar's book, spoke their vows before the Reverend, and Jed slipped the diamond ring onto her finger. She gazed at it, her lips parted, before glancing up and meeting his eyes. "My mother's," he whispered. I'm honored." Jed kissed her, softly, tenderly, tasting her sweetness, sealing their vows. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend intoned. Mrs. Hendricks burst into tears. At the hotel, Mrs. Hendricks cooked a special meal for them and had even baked them a small wedding cake. As the other guests toasted their marriage, and with his bride beside him and her hand in his, Jed thought himself the luckiest man in the world. Yet, a knot of worry stuck in his gut. He considered himself a worldly man, experienced, while this precious girl beside him was truly innocent. He had consummated his marriage to Becky, but she had known him a long time before they married. Lucretia had known him only a few hours. Yet, later in their room, his knot dissolved. His bride entered his arms willingly and kissed him with all the inexperience and innocence of youth. She gave of herself, and surrendered her innocence, and slept beside him as though born to be there. Jed drifted to sleep, feeling happier than he had in a long while. Chapter 4. Jed led Bonnie to the livery stable, his hand in hers, a smile on his face. "I hope you like her. I didn't know what else to give you as a wedding gift." Bonnie stared in amazement as the livery hand walked out of the big barn with a stunningly beautiful horse. Her mane and tail gleamed like spun silver under the sun, her coat a polished gold. A single white star graced her fine head, exactly between her huge brown eyes. Bonnie held out her hand, and the mare sniffed her curiously, her lips flapping as though hoping for a treat. "She's wonderful," Bonnie breathed. "But I have no gift to give you in return." Jed waved his hand dismissively. "Your presence here is gift enough." As the livery hand took the horse back inside to saddle her and Jed's horses, Bonnie found herself staring at her new husband. He was so handsome. Never did she imagine he would look like the cowboy of her dreams. Tall, with broad shoulders, Jed owned a tanned rugged face with eyes the color of a stormy sea. Black hair fell to his collar, and his perfect white teeth blazed when he smiled. And he smiled often. "Lucretia," he began. "Please," she said. "I like being called Bonnie." Jed all but bowed to her. "Actually, you look more like a Bonnie than a Lucretia." She tried not to squirm at her obvious deception and tried to explain. "It's a nickname, really. Bonnie, then. It's a rather long ride back to the ranch. I hope you're rested enough." She took his hand. "I'm fine. It will be time spent getting to know you." And it was. With her bags tied to the cantles of their saddles, Bonnie talked to Jed about his ranch, asked questions, and learned a great deal about him. He was everything she had hoped for: kind, considerate, Christian, generous and hard-working. While her guilt at her necessary deception bothered her, Jed made her feel so at ease she almost forgot about it. Then he said something that astounded her. "What? You have children?" she asked. He glanced at her, his brow high. "I didn't tell you about them?" "I'm sure I did." Her mind whirled. Had she missed one of Lucretia's letters? Had one fallen to the floor and been kicked under the bed or something? No. "No, you didn't tell me about them. You'll learn to love them. I know they will love you. Hunter is 9, and quite the bronc rider. Helen is 8, and already a fine cook. Charlie is barely 6. You must be very proud of them," Bonnie said, trying to conceal her worry. While she knew from his letters that he was much older than she, and that he had buried a wife, she should have suspected that he would have had children. Yet, the prospect of walking into a ready-made family daunted her. She hoped they would like her, but she felt very much aware that the opposite could become a reality. "I am proud," he replied, "very much so." "But," Bonnie began, hesitant, fearing to offend him. "What if they don't? Like me, that is." Jed gazed down at her, a slight frown crossing his handsome, rugged features. It vanished as quickly as it came, and his more familiar grin blossomed. If you work your charms on them as you have on me, you have nothing to worry about. But Bonnie had seen his fast frown and couldn't help but wonder if there was something he wasn't telling her. He didn't lie, yet he didn't answer her question, either. A lump of worry settled into her stomach and refused to be vanquished by Jed's light conversation, or his replies to her questions, and his own questions for her. However, despite her fears, she found herself engaged in vibrant conversation with him, laughing at his jests and fanciful tales of life at his ranch. Bonnie gazed around in fascination as they rode through the big gate with the wrought iron sign branching over it, announcing to the world that this was the Barty Ranch. There wasn't much else to show. It was a huge cattle ranch, for there was little save tall buffalo grass, cactus, tumbleweeds blown into thickets of stubby pine trees, and scrub oak to see in any given direction. We're still a mile from the ranch itself, Jed explained as Bonnie pursed her lips in puzzlement. Just how many cows do you own? Right around 30,000 head. Bonnie gaped. 30,000? Yes, indeed. He offered her that grin. Believe me, though, they are a lot to handle. Plus a few hundred head of horses. How many cowboys work for you? Year-round, I keep 10, he replied. During the spring calving season, I hire a few more hands temporarily, and during the fall cattle drives, I'll again hire more to help out. That's astonishing. Jed gazed around at his land as they rode through it. My father started this ranch, he said slowly. From a small homestead, he bought cattle, and with every sale, he bought more land. As the ranch increased, so did the number of cattle and so on. After he died, I carried on. With more cattle being born and sold, I bought additional land from the government. With so few of us ranching here, the price per acre is incredibly low. Thus, I've grown and prospered. What about the Indians? He smiled. They aren't so savage anymore. A few years ago, the winters were bad and there were no buffalo for them to hunt. The local tribes were on the edge of starvation and ready to start taking my herds. I sent them an offering of 100 head of cattle to keep them alive through the winter. They have repaid me with an agreement to live in peace, and we exchange gifts every summer. Bonnie stared at him in amazement. Jed shrugged. They are my neighbors. I treat them with respect and honor, send them a few head when times are tough for them, and they repay me in kind. I've heard so many horrible stories of them. And many of those tales are quite true. But few white people understand the Indian concept of honor. If an Indian gives you his word, he keeps it. Will I meet Indians? Yes, if you want to. As they rode closer to the ranch, Bonnie saw buildings and sheds, plus the cloud of dust that heralded cowboys working. On the breeze, she dimly heard shouts and piercing whistles, the bawling of cattle and the high-pitched whinnies of horses. The knot in her belly grew and created a smaller cousin in her throat. She was about to see her new home, and meet her stepchildren. They crested a small hill in the road. Bonnie reined in long enough to stare down to the big ranch house with a tendril of blue smoke rising from the chimney. More buildings, including barns and what she surmised might be the bunkhouse, flanked the big house. Dogs ran toward them, barking. 3 small figures emerged from the distant doorway to the long porch that fronted the house, and they shaded their eyes, likely to see her better. She hardly noticed that Jed had also reined in and was patiently giving her time to adjust. She sat on the Palomino mare, her mouth as dry as the dust swirling about the cowboys working the animals in the pens. Bonnie half-glanced Jed, finding him watching not her, but the activity below. Are you frightened? He asked, still not gazing at her. Bonnie swallowed. Yes, she admitted, her voice a whisper. Turning to her, Jed reached across the space between them and took her hand. You are my wife now, Bonnie, he murmured, his stormy gray eyes filled with compassion. This is your home. My children are yours. You have nothing at all to fear. Trying a smile that didn't seem to fit, Bonnie squeezed his hand in hers. I know. Come on, he said, nudging his horse. You need to get settled in, and I need to get to work." His gelding hit a trot and then a lope, her modest bags bouncing where he'd tethered them behind his saddle. Bonnie heeled her mare to follow him. As the Palomino mare cantered in his wake, she sent a quick prayer that his children would greet her with welcoming joy and happiness. She prayed that she had nothing to fear in truth, and that her new life here in the West would be filled with happiness, contentment, and children of her own. Jed reined in at the porch and swung down from his saddle, tying his reins to the hitching post in a quick knot. Bonnie halted the mare beside the gelding and stared at the children waiting for their father on the porch. They stared back, unsmiling. Hunter's face appeared stiff, his mouth a thin, narrow line. Helen's expression bordered surliness, her gray eyes snapping with annoyance and disdain. Young Charlie merely gawked at her, holding Helen's hand as he scratched his arm. "Bonnie," Jed said, helping her down from the mare's saddle. "I'm pleased to introduce to you my children. This is Hunter, Helen, and Charlie." "Hunter, Helen, Charlie, please say hello to your new mother, Bonnie." "She's not my mother," Helen declared, whirling and taking Charlie with her into the house. The door slammed shut behind them. Bonnie's gut lurched as Hunter's expression darkened. He looked so much like Jed, with the same gray eyes, dark hair tumbling over his brow and features that would turn to ruggedness as he matured. Yet, she found no welcome in his hard expression, and she glanced away. Jed sighed. In that breath, Bonnie realized that Jed knew his children hated the very idea of him marrying her. He knew they would not welcome her with open arms, and he knew of their disapproval and condemnation. And for an instant, she was angry with him for it. "Hunter," Jed said, taking Bonnie's hand and leading her up the porch steps. "Unsaddle Bonnie's mare and rub her down." Without a word, the boy stalked past her and seized the mare's reins. With more force than necessary, he led the placid horse toward the barn. Behind Jed, Bonnie walked on feet she didn't feel across the threshold of her home. The interior of the house was constructed of wood floors and walls, and thick beams supported the high ceiling. A large fieldstone fireplace stood against the north wall with a small fire blazing on the hearth. Cowhide rugs covered much of the hard planks and the rough-hewn wood furniture. Trophy deer, antelope, and elk antlers covered the walls while a buffalo head with glass eyes glared at her from over the fireplace mantel. "You have no place here," they seemed to say. Beyond the large living room were the bedrooms, and Jed led her to the largest of them. Inside, she found a huge bed covered in blankets and a colorful quilt, with yet another, though smaller, stone fireplace. A few cow and elk hide chairs supplied more furniture, as well as a small writing desk. "Please make yourself at home, Bonnie," he said, his tone soft. His finger under her chin tilted her face up to his. He kissed her gently, tenderly, a loving husband. "Don't worry about the children," he murmured. "It will be all right." He gestured toward a tall oak wardrobe. "Put your clothes in there." "I'm sorry, but I have to go. I'll be back for supper." With that, he departed, leaving her alone in a house full of strangers. Uncertain of what to do next, Bonnie walked around the large quarters, examining things, picking up a portrait in a gilded frame from the writing desk. It was of a handsome woman wearing her hair pinned up and a cameo at her throat. The lady had no smile, but her eyes met Bonnie's with kindness. "That's my mother," a voice behind her snapped. "Put it down." Obeying instantly, Bonnie swung around. "I'm sorry. I was just looking." Helen gazed at her with loathing. "Don't think for a minute you can take her place." "I don't want to. I don't intend to." Charlie peeped up at her from behind his sister's back, his mouth open and his eyes wide. Helen pressed him back protectively with her hand. "Just so you know. You are not our mother." For a moment, Bonnie wanted to lash out at the girl, demand respect as her father's wife. Instead, she channeled her anger into a cold haughtiness that lifted her chin and thinned her mouth. "I have no intention of replacing your mother, Helen," she said. "I'd never dream of it. Just know this, however. Your father married me of his own volition. I am a part of this household whether you like it or not." Helen's mouth tightened, and her eyes sparked anger. We'll see about that. Taking Charlie with her, Helen vanished from the doorway. Bonnie sat down at the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands. What have I gotten myself into? She whispered. Only the thought of Lucretia's survival stiffened her back. Had her sister Lucretia managed, against all odds, to endure the trip west, she'd no doubt succumb to the children's hatred of any woman who married their father. Her younger sister could never hope to manage children like these. But now, Lucretia could marry Nick and have her own children, not raise someone else's. For that, Bonnie felt grateful. I'll do whatever it takes, Bonnie murmured. I have to. Chapter 5. Bone weary, Jed surrendered his gelding to the hand who tipped his hat and led the sweaty horse toward the barn. The sun had already descended past the distant Tetons, leaving purple, orange, and red streaks across the sky. He walked up the steps of the porch, not eager to enter his home. He'd hoped and prayed his children would accept Bonnie without quarrel, but their faces as they gazed at his beautiful young wife haunted him throughout the day. They detested her on sight, and there was little he could do about it. Turning, he gazed out across the now quiet land, the cattle settling down for the night. The horses in the pens ate their hay, heads down, tails swishing at the persistent flies. His hands had gone to their bunkhouse where the cook would feed them before leaving to take her own rest in her tiny cottage. He had grown this empire, an empire that he could hand down to Hunter and Charlie. He'd see Helen married to a kind and generous man who had the same ambitions, to carve his own way in this wild landscape. Shaking his head at his children's stubbornness, Jed opened the door and walked inside. Hanging his hat on its peg, he glanced around, half hoping a miracle had occurred while he was gone. His hopes lay in vain. Hunter carried freshly chopped wood to the box beside the fireplace, refusing to acknowledge his father's existence. Charlie greeted him with a puzzled frown as he sat on the cowhide rug, organizing sticks for kindling. Beyond the massive living room, Jed caught the odors of cooking emanating from the kitchen. Walking in that direction, he peered in. Helen stood with her arms crossed, glaring as Bonnie set the table for 5. Bonnie refused to acknowledge the girl's animosity and poured water into glasses from a pitcher. His wife caught sight of his face in the doorway, hesitated a moment, then turned away from him. Opening the oven, she tested the meat pies within, and closed the oven door. Keeping her back to the both of them, she drew more water from the indoor pump into a pan for later washing. Jed jerked his head at Helen. Rolling her eyes, his daughter followed him into the living room. He grasped her by her upper arms. What is this? What is what? You know what I'm talking about. Jed glared at his daughter. You stand there and disrespect my wife. Helen sulked. She doesn't belong here, Pa. Resisting the urge to shake her, Jed growled, Bonnie belongs here because I say she does. Understand? She is my wife, and you will respect her. Helen pouted, glancing aside. Yes, sir. That goes for Hunter, too, he said, turning to Hunter. Jed's eyes met his eldest son's. Hunter tried to stare him down before subsiding and sulking as much as Helen was. Whatever you say, he muttered. Jed glanced from Hunter to Helen and back again. I can't believe you two, he said. Neither of you would dare treat a guest in this fashion. Yet, here you are, disrespecting not just Bonnie, but me as well. His children stared at the floor, but the set of their mouths never changed. Perhaps extra chores might cure those attitudes, Jed announced. Tomorrow, since you don't have school, both of you will do not just your regular chores, but you will also be cleaning the barn. Every stall will be mucked and fresh straw put down. When that's done, you'll both clean the bunkhouse. Got it? Twin faces gaped up at him, astounded, chastened. Yet deep inside, while Jed attempted stern discipline, he knew he had just intensified his children's resentment toward Bonnie. They would blame her for their difficulties, not him. But he had no other choice. They must learn to respect Bonnie as his wife, his partner, and their stepmother. Without discipline, they would ride roughshod over her and make her life miserable. He didn't bring her all the way from Alabama to make her a slave to his children. Tension filled the kitchen at supper time. Hunter and Helen refused to meet the eyes of either Bonnie or himself, and ate their meat pie mechanically, while Charlie talked to anyone who would listen about his adventures that day. Bonnie ate very little and excused herself early to start clearing away the meal and wash the dishes. Under her father's scowl, Helen rose to help her while Hunter fed the fire with fresh wood. Hunter left the house to bring in more and filled the woodbox with chunks of cut oak and pine. Charlie yawned on the rug in front of the fire before nodding off, slumping to the floor. Hunter carried him to bed, then vanished into his own room. Helen emerged from the kitchen, and without a word, climbed the stairs to the loft where her bed was. Bonnie, too, had no word for Jed as she went into the room she now shared with him and closed the door. Jed sat for a long time, staring into the dancing flames. He knew deep down that the notion of marrying Bonnie was the right decision. But just then, he felt he had done them all a terrible disservice and realized there was nothing he could do to change it. Chapter 6. Bonnie rose before dawn, listening to Jed's light snores. She had slept very little, and what sleep she did catch had been haunted by bad dreams. Turning up the wick on the lamp, she dressed quietly and went into the kitchen to begin breakfast. Opening the stove, she piled wood inside and blew up the flames. She closed the door, then fetched frying pans, bacon, potatoes, an onion and a scoop of oats. Pouring water into a pan, she poured in the oats and set it on the stove. Thinking that she had never been more miserable in her life, Bonnie peeled the potatoes. Never had she felt so alone. She knew the children would never accept her. While Jed might make an excellent husband, life with him would doubtless be one misery after another. She had no experience with children, and dealing with three who resented her gave her few openings with which to win them over. As the oats began to boil, Bonnie felt exceedingly warm. She dismissed it as the day's rising heat as the sun burst over the horizon. It was almost summer there in Wyoming. Cutting the potatoes into a frying pan, she diced onion among them, then sliced bacon into yet a third pan. She was feeding 5, thus she loaded the pans generously. On the other side of the kitchen doorway, she heard murmured voices, and knew everyone had risen with the sun. Happy that they hadn't yet entered the kitchen, she stirred the oats. The bacon and potatoes heated up, the bacon spitting grease. Tantalizing aromas wafted on the early morning air. Turning away from the stove, she sought a spatula among the kitchen tools, and failed to find one. Frowning, she searched the rows of hanging utensils for long minutes, yet found everything except what she wanted. She grew warmer as she searched, but she paid little heed to the rising heat in the kitchen. Only when the sharp odor of burning meat caught her nostrils did she turn in disdain. The fire in the stove had climbed dangerously high. Both the potatoes and the bacon were blackening, and the oats were boiling down to a hardened crisp. "What are you doing?" Helen all but hollered. Her yell brought Jed and Hunter on the run. The cast iron stove itself turned an ominous dark shade of red. Bonnie frantically seized a towel and yanked the pans away as Helen grabbed a bucket of water. Opened the stove using a thick towel, she tossed half of the water onto the huge yellow and orange flames. Hissing balefully, the conflagration died down. "What happened?" Jed asked, hustling to the kitchen. "She put too much wood in the stove, Pa," Helen barked, glaring at Bonnie. "She almost burned the house down." Bonnie flushed, tears filling her eyes. While Jed's kind eyes gazed at her with compassion, Hunter's held none at all. "She's stupid," he snapped. "Look, she burned our breakfast, too." Jed cuffed his son. "I told you to be respectful. Apologize to Bonnie." Hunter grumbled something that sounded like "I'm sorry," but Bonnie didn't care. Mortification filled her soul, and she fought not to cry. She knew Hunter and Helen would consider her tears a weakness and that she mustn't ever weep in front of them. "It's not that bad," Jed asserted. "Helen, you and Hunter feed the burnt parts to the pigs. It won't be wasted. Look, the stove has cooled enough to start breakfast over." Bonnie refused to look at him as the two obeyed, taking the pans of charcoaled bacon, potatoes, and oats out the kitchen door. It slammed behind them. "It's all right, Bonnie," Jed said gently. "I'm sorry," she whispered, still fighting against the tears. Mistakes happen. Don't worry too much, all right? You're still adjusting to that stove. Nodding, yet still avoiding his gaze, she began peeling potatoes again. The next few days passed, and Bonnie learned quickly how much wood to put in the stove for cooking and how to dampen the heat when necessary. During the weekdays, Helen and Hunter attended the one-room schoolhouse near Plum River, riding their horses with their books and lunches packed in their saddlebags. Bonnie cared for Charlie, who wasn't to start school until the following year. She also cleaned the house, fed the chickens and pigs, hoed the garden and cooked the meals. Jed worked hard, and often left soon after breakfast, not returning until after sunset. Hunter and Helen continued to treat her with cold aloofness, and Charlie soon picked up their attitudes. When Bonnie caught him pulling up the young onions growing in the garden, she seized him by his arm and delivered a sharp scolding. Charlie promptly fisted his small hand and struck her in her belly. While it hardly hurt, Bonnie felt stunned by his total lack of respect or discipline. Had she ever hit her mother, she wouldn't have been able to sit for a week. As it was, she took him to his room and ordered him to stay there until supper. Yet when Helen and Hunter returned from school, they immediately let him out. Scowling at Bonnie, they took Charlie with them as they began their afternoon chores. I won't complain to Jed, Bonnie thought firmly. He has enough to reckon with on the ranch. Over the short time she'd been at the bar tea, she learned to admire her husband. Not just that he worked hard, but that he managed the ranch with the eye of a successful businessman. When he had time to talk in the evenings, he explained much of what running a big ranch entailed. At times when her own work was done, Bonnie saddled her Palomino mare and rode to the pens. There, she watched the cowhands break young horses or brand calves. The hands tipped their hats to her respectfully and treated her like a queen, answering her questions honestly. Some made her smile and laugh, and others even presented her with picked wild flowers. Jed himself didn't seem to mind that his men tended to gather around Bonnie since they'd see few women in the area, save those few in Plum River. Bonnie enjoyed the attention they gave her. They made her feel wanted, hopeful, and above all liked. She rode back from one of her excursions around the ranch, unsaddling the golden mare herself, since Hunter flat refused to help her. Yet, she delighted in the quiet company of the horse and relished the time grooming her. After seeing the horse well fed and watered, Bonnie returned to the house. She planned on making an apple pie for Jed since it was his favorite. Walking through the door, she glanced up and screamed. Tied to the top of the door with a piece of string, hung a squirming green snake. She backed away from the creature so fast, she stumbled and fell hard onto her fanny, skinning her elbows on the rough wood of the porch. Gasping for breath, she lay there, listening to the high-pitched laughter of Hunter and Charlie and watching the serpent twist in a vain effort to free itself. The sound of galloping hooves heralded the approach of Jed and one of the hands. Bonnie, Jed yelled, launching himself from his horse before it slid to a halt. What happened? The laughter inside the house stilled. Bruised and her elbows on fire, Bonnie found Jed's hand helping her to rise. Her gaze never left the snake. Hunter! Jed bellowed. Get out here now. The cowhand, Seth, cut the string holding the creature and held it in his hand. Ma'am, it's a harmless garter snake. Bonnie shuddered and turned her face into Jed's strong shoulder. She didn't look up even when Hunter and Charlie emerged from the house to face their father's wrath. What is this? Jed demanded. Hanging a snake right here, trying to scare Bonnie? We just wanted to have some fun, Hunter's sullen voice stated. Fun? She could have been hurt. Both of you to the woodshed. Now. His voice cracked like a whip. Still shaking, fighting her tears of fright and shame, Bonnie didn't watch the boys go but listened as their feet trod down the steps. Jed hugged her tight. It felt so good to be held in his strong arms, to listen to the thud of his heart in his chest. Gradually her shaking ebbed away, and she relaxed against him. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, he murmured against her hair. They're boys, and boys love practical jokes. They hate me. Jed was silent for a long moment. Give them time. They'll come around eventually. Setting her away from him, Jed kissed her, and smiled down into her eyes. "You're a wonderful lady, Bonnie. A fine wife and an excellent mother. Soon, they will see what I see in you." She aimed a tremulous smile up at him. "And you are the husband any girl dreams about. Her strong, handsome cowboy." He laughed, kissed her again, and walked off the porch to the back of the house. Seth, already mounted, tipped his hat to her, the small snake still in his hand. "I'll take this where it won't bother you, ma'am." "Thank you, Seth." Despite Jed's firm insistence that the children treat her with respect, they continued their torments. Bonnie would hang freshly cleaned laundry on the line to dry in the light breeze, only to find the white sheets and linens had fallen mysteriously into the dirt. Without witnesses, she could not point any fingers. Soon after one such an occurrence, she saddled her palomino, only to find the girth strap cut. She was forced to ask one of the cowhands to mend it for her. Then she discovered the gate to the pig pen open, and the pigs wandering about the yard and barns. As there was no one to help her, and as it was imperative they stay out of the garden, she was forced to chase them under the hot sun, gasping and sweating, until she got them penned back up again. The glares, now subdued when Jed was around, continued, as did the sharp criticism from Helen and Hunter. The youngest, Charlie, complained to her whenever Jed wasn't around. Helpless, unable to discipline them herself, Bonnie felt that if it weren't for Jed's sympathy and support, she would have asked him for money to return to Alabama. But she couldn't, no more than she could ask him for the money her family needed so badly back home. Bonnie wandered the house, empty for the moment, with Hunter and Helen at school and Charlie napping in the room he shared with Hunter. School will be out soon for the year, she thought. Then they will be here all the time, tormenting me relentlessly. She felt so alone, trapped in a situation of her own making. She wondered if her marriage to Liam O'Bannon would have been this bad. At the moment, his Irish Catholic heritage seemed preferable. "I need to confess. I need to tell Jed," she said aloud, staring out the great window that faced the distant Tetons. Her guilt at not telling him the truth that she was not Lucretia burned at her soul. He might be very angry to discover her deception. With every day that passed, Bonnie realized that she could never dare ask him for money to help her parents keep their farm, one of the reasons she had taken Lucretia's place. "At least, Lucretia is safe," she murmured. Chapter 7. Jed sweated under the sun, dust from the cattle's hooves sticking to his damp face. He took off his hat and waved it in front of himself, hoping to find some cool air as he sat on his gelding and watched the hands drive the cattle to a new pasture. Summer approached fast, and there had been little rain to dampen the ground and grow the grass his livestock needed. He watched Seth lope toward him and rein in beside him. "There is plenty of water in the river, boss," Seth said. "I saw one of Red Hand's warriors." "And?" He said the buffalo were headed north, and they were packing up to follow. "They'll be back before winter." Red Hand, the chief of a band of Cheyenne Indians, considered Jed a friend. Jed liked to stay in contact with him whenever possible because his warriors helped guard his herds against raiding tribes and cattle rustlers. Jed nodded, knowing that the Indians followed the buffalo across the vast prairie regularly. "Are the cattle settled?" "Yeah, boss." "Gather the boys. Time to head home." At Seth's sharp whistle, the cowboys, 7 in all, galloped their horses toward them. Jed turned his gelding and nudged the horse into a steady, mile-leading lope. They'd be back before sundown. As he rode, he half-listened the cow hands talk in coarse jokes, wondering what to do about Bonnie and the children. While he knew they resented her, he had no idea their antipathy would carry on so long. Bonnie married him almost a month past, and they were no closer to caring for her than at the beginning. He couldn't help but smile to himself. Bonnie. So beautiful and so strong. His feelings for her grew slowly but steadily. While her eyes told him how unhappy she was at times, she never failed to find a smile for him. She never complained, never asked him to discipline the children, never told him of the pranks they pulled on her. He knew they did pull pranks, for he saw the evidence of them. He still firmly believed that Bonnie would win them over in time. Just as she had won him. His confidence shattered upon his arrival home when he found his house in turmoil. Handing his horse's reins to Seth to care for, he ran into the house amidst the yelling voices. "What's going on?" he demanded. Bonnie stood by the window, her face flushed with shame and mortification, near tears. Her arms crossed over her stomach, she all but appeared sick. Hunter and Helen pointed accusing fingers at her. "She threw out our flowers, Pa!" Hunter yelled. "The flowers we gathered and pressed." "What flowers?" "For our school project," Helen snapped. "We'd been collecting them for weeks. We dried them and pressed them into pages with their names labeled. She threw them out because she hates us." Jed glanced at Bonnie for an explanation. "I was cleaning. I thought they were weeds," she stammered, her tone low. "Had I known they were for their school, I would never have tossed them." "I'm sorry." "That's not enough," Helen cried. "All our work is for nothing, and all she says is I'm sorry." "Well, now," Jed drawled. "How often have you apologized for the pranks you've played on Bonnie?" The pair of them gaped. Bonnie's jaw dropped. "Oh, yes," he went on sternly. "I know about them. And no, Bonnie never said a thing. She's kept your little secrets, Hunter and Helen. So, before you start scrapping about Bonnie's mistake, how about you two own up to some of your own?" "We just want her gone," Hunter said, his tone sullen. "She hates us." "Then it's a good thing you are not the head of this house." "I am." Bonnie admitted it was a mistake. "You two have made her life a living torture, and if anyone is hating, it's you." "She's lying, Pa," Helen insisted. "She did it on purpose." "Did you do it on purpose, Bonnie?" Bonnie's chin lifted. "Of course not. I believe her. Now have you two been playing pranks on her?" The pair of them glanced at one another and didn't speak. At that moment, Charlie came into the room, his small face tense. Marching up to Bonnie, he swung his small fist and planted it in her stomach. Jed snatched his arm and spun the boy around. He paddled Charlie's bottom until the boy wailed, his face red and tears spouting from his eyes. "How long has this been going on?" Jed roared, outraged. He didn't let go of Charlie's arm. Bonnie turned toward the window, refusing to answer. His hot glare found Hunter and Helen, who blanched under his fierce scrutiny. "Almost every day," Helen whispered, cringing. Jed fell silent, his rage still boiling in his blood. The only sound was the youngster's, his wails turning to gasped sobs. He stared at his children, not knowing quite what to say. While he wanted to storm at them and send them to the woodshed for a proper belting, he hung on to his temper. "I raised you better," he said, his tone low, hard. "You know better. I taught you to respect adults, to work hard and do well in school. Right now, I am ashamed to call you my own." Both Helen and Hunter flushed and stared at the floor. Bonnie still gazed out the window as though she hadn't heard a word. "You both will cook supper," he said. "And this one will be going to bed without his." He let go of Charlie, permitting the boy to run to his room and shut the door. Hunter and Helen vanished into the kitchen. He walked to his wife and put his hand on her shoulder. She, too, turned away, and walked out the front door, leaving him to stand alone. When Jed woke the next morning, Bonnie was not there beside him. Her side of the bed was cold, thus, she had been gone a while. While that was not unusual, as she nearly always rose early to start breakfast, a knot of misgiving settled into his belly. She had spoken not a word the night before. She had barely eaten her food and gone to bed long before him. He dressed quickly, and went to the kitchen, thinking to see her there. The kitchen was empty, the stove cold. Yawning, Helen came in, and stopped, clearly surprised that breakfast hadn't yet been started. "Where's Bonnie?" she asked. "I don't know." Helen shrugged. "She's probably lollygagging with that horse." She deftly ignored the sharp stare her father gave her, but Jed was too worried to admonish her. "Start breakfast," he ordered, putting on his hat. Bonnie wasn't in the barn. She wasn't feeding the chickens or the pigs. Her mare was still in her stall, waiting for her own breakfast along with the rest of the horses. Jed walked around the buildings and sheds, not finding a trace of her. Could she have run away? He wondered. Maybe she left, Hunter commented when Jed returned to the kitchen to eat, but his voice didn't sound as pleased as Jed would have expected. During breakfast, Hunter and Helen, along with Charlie, only picked at their bacon and eggs. Jed could hardly touch his. They seemed out of sorts that Bonnie was missing, although not a one of them voiced any concern. Leaving them to clean up, Jed went out the back to find Seth. "Keep the hands working," he said tersely. "I have to find Bonnie." "The missus? She's missing?" "Yes." Jed scoured the area, walking everywhere he could think of. She couldn't have gotten far on foot, he thought. The thought that nagged at him was that she walked out into the wilds unprotected. He shoved that horrifying thought away, but it returned on stealthy feet. By mid-morning, the children, with Charlie holding Helen's hand, joined the search. "She'll be all right, won't she, Pa?" Jed glanced at Hunter, who, for the first time, wore a concerned frown, his brow wrinkled in worry. Helen fussed with Charlie, all the while biting her lip. Were they finally coming around? Now that she was missing? Jed sighed. "I hope she's all right. Come on. We need to keep searching." Chapter 8. Her body racked by pain, Bonnie lay in a ditch, the sun beating down on her like a village bully with a cudgel. She knew she had hit her head during the fall into the steep ravine, for she'd stumbled over a rock in the near darkness and woke under the blazing sun. Blood trickled down her cheek. When she tried to move, she almost screamed. Her leg, twisted into a shape God never intended, exploded with agony. She lay back gasping. "I'm going to die." No one knew where she was. And no one, except maybe Jed, would care enough to look for her. If she didn't manage to get out of the ravine by nightfall, the coyotes would finish off what the sun and thirst hadn't managed to kill. Lifting her head long enough to look at her swollen, broken leg, she knew she could never climb out of the ravine. The steep walls filled with loose sand and rock gave few handholds, even if she had the courage to use her other limbs to climb and drag her useless leg behind her. Thinking of Jed and her family in Alabama, Bonnie covered her eyes with her arm. "Look after them, Lord," she prayed. "I'll be with you soon." Condemning herself for giving up without more fight, she uncovered her eyes, blinking at the sheer walls surrounding her. Maybe if she crawled along the ravine, she might find a shallower ascent to the top. Yet, as she made to sit up, the pain flaring anew flopped her back down. Tears crept from beneath her eyes and mixed with the blood on her face. "I can't." Voices drifted down from above. High voices. The voices of children. "Here," she yelled as loud as she could. "I'm over here. Bonnie?" Within moments, Hunter and Helen with Charlie in tow, slid down the embankment to her side. "What happened?" Hunter asked. Bonnie tried to smile. "I wanted to find your flowers," she whispered. "To replace them." Turning her head, her weak hand indicated the wildflowers she had gathered before her tumble, lying scattered about nearby. "I wanted to make things up to you." Helen looked abashed at Bonnie's words. She reached out and roughly brushed a tendril of her blonde hair from Bonnie's face. "You were collecting our flowers?" she asked, her voice indicating that she didn't quite believe it. I didn't mean to throw your project away." Bonnie's tremulous smile matched Helen's. "I'm so sorry." Helen's eyes misted over, and Bonnie scarcely dared think that maybe the child was softening toward her. "And now you done broke your leg? On account of us?" Helen sucked in her breath, the moisture pooling in her eyes and trickling down her cheeks. Hunter let out a huge sigh. "How dumb that you fell into a ditch." But behind his words was a hint of concern. "I know," Bonnie said, wincing with a new stab of pain. "I was pretty dumb, huh?" His mouth contorted, and she knew he was suppressing a grin. "Sorry," Helen murmured. "For all that stuff we done." Bonnie's breath caught. Had she heard right? She stretched out her hand and touched Helen's cheek. I forgive you. Charlie looked back and forth from brother to his sister. He stuck out his lower lip. Sorry, too. At that moment, Jed's head appeared over the top of the ravine. Oh, dear God. Half running, half jumping down the steep side of the embankment, he knelt beside Bonnie. Hunter, you ride. Get to town and fetch the doctor. After giving a quick squeeze to Bonnie's shoulder, the boy scrambled up the sandy slope and disappeared. Helen, you take Charlie and get Seth to come help. I can help. No, please go get Seth. Obeying him, Helen dragged Charlie up with her, following on her brother's heels. Jed examined Bonnie's leg, frowning. What were you doing out here, Bonnie? Trying to rectify my mistake. It wasn't a mistake worth risking your life over, he growled, bending to kiss her. We could have lost you. I'm sorry, Jed. You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart. But I'm going to have to pick you up and carry you. It's going to hurt like fire. I know. Jed slid his arms gently under her. Her face twisted with agony, and she moaned as she wrapped her arms around his neck. He stood up, cradling her in his strong arms. Excruciating pain romped through her, but she gritted her teeth as he started walking. Finding a shallower rise, he climbed up and hurried with her toward the ranch house. Tell me a little more about your family, Bonnie, he said, walking resolutely. Let's talk about something to get your mind off your pain. I'm all right, she said through tight lips. You ain't all right at all. And then Bonnie knew. The time had come. She had to clear her conscience. I am not Lucretia, she blurted, resting her face against his shoulder, her eyes closed. My sister could never have survived the trip west. I took her place. I know. Stunned, she lifted her eyes to his. What? He grinned, his teeth flashing. I opened your Bible, sweetheart. Bonnie B. Abel. Your sister did mention in one of her letters that she had been ill as a child and was frail. His grin widened. You, my dear, are anything but frail. But I deceived you. I'm so sorry. I love you anyway, Bonnie. I think I fell in love the minute you walked out of that coach. She groaned and took a huge breath. There's more, Jed. I ask your forgiveness. For what? Bonnie swallowed hard, the pain in her body hardly matching the guilt in her soul. Lucretia selected you because you might help our parents keep their farm back in Alabama. And I also came, to ask your help. To marry you, a cowboy who might help his wife's family. Do you love me, Bonnie? She tightened her arms around him. I love you more than my own blood kin. Which is why I won't ask for your help. I only beg forgiveness. Bending awkwardly, Jed's lips found hers. She felt his deep and abiding love in that kiss, and even in her pain, she returned his kiss with all her heart. When two people love each other, he said, there's nothing that can come between them. Nothing will come between us, Bonnie. But I was going to use you. Not even that. I will help your family. They are my family now, too. Nestling her head under his chin, Bonnie's heart swelled with relief and love. Not even her pain could still the growing warmth in her soul as her husband carried her home. Epilogue. The doctor from Plum River came quickly to set Bonnie's leg, splinting it neatly with 2 pieces of wood and a tidy amount of cloth. When Bonnie heard the doctor's orders that she stay off her leg for at least 2 weeks, she'd argued heartily with him. How was she to tend to her chores laid up like that? Bonnie, Doc answered patiently, need I remind you that this family got along without you for a long time? 2 more weeks isn't gonna hurt anything. Doc explained the care she would need. Bonnie listened with dismay as she became a temporary invalid who would need to spend her time propped up in bed. The 3 children stood flat against her bedroom wall, their eyes big and round, listening carefully. Doc turned to them. You'll help, won't you? They nodded with grave expressions, clearly taking it to heart. 5 days later, Bonnie was over the worst of the pain. She could hardly believe the change in the children. They ran in and out of her room, chatting with her, showing her things, and fetching her food and water. She had to pinch herself to believe it. And now that their animosity had faded into nothing, she was free to really enjoy them. Each of their personalities was so different. Hunter was proud and full of self-confidence. His only fear appeared to be falling short in his teacher's eyes. Helen was sweet and motherly. She carried the burden of raising Charlie, and Bonnie was happy that she would be able to relieve Helen of that pressure very soon. And then there was Charlie. Behind his shyness, behind his following Helen around like a little puppy, was a boy with a wonderful sense of humor. Each time he visited Bonnie's room, she ended up laughing. Jed was beside himself with joy. Every morning and evening, he moved about the house with renewed vigor and a never-ending smile. The tenderness with which he tended Bonnie often brought her to tears. "You see," he told her one evening after the sun had long set and the cicadas were chirping loudly, "I told you they'd come around." She gave him a playful nudge in the shoulder. "I didn't really believe you," she admitted. He grinned at her. "Truthfully, I had my doubts, too." Her eyes misted over. "But you were right. And I'm so glad." "So am I." He leaned down and kissed her gently on the lips. She smiled up at him. "Do you think it will take as long for them to get used to the idea of a new little brother or sister?" Jed's mouth dropped open. He reared back. "What? Are you?" She laughed. "I'm not sure yet. But maybe." He put his arms around her and hugged her as close as he could without disturbing her leg. "I'm so happy. So happy." She giggled. "I'm not sure yet, you know." He drew back and gazed into her eyes. "I know you're not. But it will happen. If not already, then soon." "Soon," she whispered back, pulling him toward her for another kiss. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.